Also, he advised, when he spoke, he advised the whites, he said, let us stand on our own legs, work with our own hands, and eat bread at the sweat of our own brows. The path to national reconciliation and justice was clear. Deal justly with him, Douglass advised. He is a human being capable of judging between good and evil, right and wrong, liberty and slavery, and is as much of a subject of law as any other man. So he once again made it very clear on, and this is before emancipation happened for the enslaved. Now, as you can imagine, when the enslaved were set free, some of the Northerners got concerned as well, because here you have 4 million people, men and women, in the job market, looking for, jobs and wages and things like that. And does that not sound like what's going on with immigration? People are coming over the borders now, and the concern is, well, what about our jobs? What about, what's going to happen to us? What about our economy? So same thing is going on right now. Also, as you can imagine, the former enslaved were quick to leave the plantation. So once they realized that they were free, they got up out of the plantations. And they explored their freedom in many ways, like they reorganized their lives, their families, their communities, and even some of them took new names to signify their freedom. And I heard about this, I record the Tamron Hall show every day. I love watching Tamron Hall. And she, on one show last week, had her genealogy done. And she found out that one of her great-great-grandfathers, I think on her mother's side, who was enslaved, and when he became free, he got rid of his enslaved surname and took on another name, which was the name of a creek near where he lived. Completely changed his name because to signify the fact that he was now free, he no longer wanted to be associated with his slave master, so to speak. So also, they were also eager to solemnize relationships that they were not allowed to do under slavery. So they rushed to marry the people they were in love with, or had relationships with. And sometimes they had mass weddings where up to as many as 70 couples got married at one time. So I mean, the way as you read some history and the way some people recount our history, is like we had no inclination to do the right thing, or no inclination to be in relationships in a legal way. We knew enough to know that, no, this is not right. We were reading the Bible, we were understanding religion and the legal practices. So no, once they were not enslaved anymore, they decided they wanted to get married. They established their own churches, which became the centers of their communities. And that's how the black church became so powerful, which is right after slavery, because that's where the community was actually formed. Also, as you can imagine, many took to the roads to find their lost family members. As we talked about previously, a lot of times, family members were split up. One family member may be sold south, another one may be sold to another state, so they were split in many different directions, or in different plantations in the same state. So they, as soon as they were able to, they went to look for, a mother maybe went to look for a son or a daughter, or a son or a daughter went to look for his mother or father, or a husband went to look for his wife. Maybe they were married when they got here, in this country. So some of the former enslaved established a life, who had established a life of freedom in the North. In other words, they had escaped slavery prior to the emancipation, actually came back down south to look for their family members, because they were so, the need was so strong. As you can imagine, if you're being separated from your family, you have an opportunity now because remember before, if they had gone south and they were caught, they could be re-enslaved. So once they escaped slavery, before emancipation, and went north, they stayed north until the coast was clear and they could actually get back to the south if they could, in an attempt to find their lost relatives, and also to see what had changed. Okay, and we're going to talk about one man, Jermaine Logwin, in just a minute, who's a good example of this. But I put on the first page of your handout a picture of Hiram Revels. Now, during Reconstruction, there were more elected black officials during that time period than there's ever been at any time in our history, okay? But Hiram Revels is a name you should know because he was the first African-American to serve in the U.S. Congress, okay? He was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina in 1827. He was an ordained minister and served as a chaplain in the Union Army during the Civil War before being elected to the Senate in 1870, okay? So make sure you know Hiram Revels. How many people have heard of Hiram Revels? Anybody? No? Okay, all right. So that's a name that you definitely should know. So back to talking about the enslaved leaving and looking, leaving the North and coming back south, looking for lost loved ones and seeing what was going on now that slavery had ended, is a man named Jermaine Loguen, okay? Jermaine Loguen, L-O-G-U-E-N, which is an odd name. Never heard of that name. But anyway, he had escaped Tennessee slavery in 1835 and eventually became a respected AME Zion minister and a leader of the Underground Railroad in Syracuse, New York. However, after the war ended, and then this, the war ended in January 1865, sorry. 1865, in July 1865, he returned to Columbia in central West Tennessee in search of his past and also to see what had changed. He looked for the familiar whipping poles and went back to the plantation looking for the whipping poles, the auction block, but both had disappeared, but the slave pens remained. And he said, this is a quote, much to his delight, the region's former slave owners and traders had taken up residence in the pens. So he was, glad to see that they were not doing well and they were living in the same conditions that the enslaved had lived in, during slavery. So that was a measure of justice for him. He felt that there was a measure of justice. But when, while in Columbia, when Loguen preached, he preached to both whites and blacks. And some of whom had come just to see what had happened to good old Jarm, as they called him. So he had escaped, and so here's an enslaved person that had come back home, so to speak, and they wanted to see what was going on, how he was doing, what was going on. Even his old mother rode a horse for 10 miles, and she was old and feeble, rode a horse for 10 miles to hear and see her son preach, okay? And he was one of the lucky few. Not a lot of people, not a lot of enslaved were able to catch up and find their family members. So he was blessed in the fact that he was able to, his mother was able to find him, and he was able to go back to see what was going on in his former plantation. A lot of times the siblings were forever lost. They never saw their mother again, or sisters or brothers, so he was blessed in that way. All right, so we're going on to the next slide and talk about Wallace Turnage. Has anybody ever heard of Wallace Turnage? Nope. Okay. These are, like I said, these are intriguing stories to me because, we hear a lot of the times we hear the same stories about the same people over and over again. Our history is a lot more expansive than that. So I want to make sure we include those names and people and stories that we may not have heard of. And this man was really intriguing to me because he is the epitome of never, ever, 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 ever give up. Persistence. He was persistent in seeking his freedom, which he eventually got, but listen to his story. So Wallace Turnage was a former enslaved man from North Carolina, and he was an enslaved person during the Civil War and after. He was born in Greene County, North Carolina, on a small tobacco and cotton farm that had only 7 enslaved people. However, Turnage's was with his mother at that time. However, his the master or owner he had at that time fell into debt, and he sent the 14-year-old to Richmond, Virginia, to a slave dealer. Okay. Now let's put a pin in that. Richmond, Virginia, was considered the capital of the internal slave trade, which is the second Middle Passage. Okay. Now the first Middle Passage was what? This is a pop quiz here. What was the first Middle Passage? Yeah, can anybody get a mic? Yeah, okay, thank you. I think even though the monitor's not on, I think we're streaming. Yeah. Yeah. So just quickly, what was the first Middle Passage?
When they brought us across from Africa.
Okay, across the Atlantic Ocean. There's the first Middle Passage. So the second Middle Passage is when the enslaved were sold either from one plantation to another, or one state or to another or something. So that was called the second Middle Passage. So here he was in North Carolina. He was sent to Richmond, Virginia, which was the center of the second Middle Passage, the internal slave trade. And he was then sold for $1,000 to a Scottish-born Alabama cotton planter named James Chalmers. Okay, so we're talking about Wallace Turnage, and he was sold to an Alabama cotton planter named James Chalmers. Now, he's headed to the Deep South, and he had every reason to believe he would never see his mother again. And according to his own account, and they have an account of his story, the first day on that Alabama plantation, he witnessed a cruel overseer grab a poor enslaved woman, pull up her dress in the field, and whip her with about 200 lashes. First day on the plantation. He thought she was going to die, okay? So as you can imagine, he's starting to think, okay, starting to plot in his mind, how am I going to get out of here? So by the fall, after seeing enough horrifying abuse to other enslaved people, and also getting whipped 3 or 4 times himself, he decided, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to flee. He's trying to figure it out. But the resistance only angered his owners, and when they found out he tried to flee, he was returned and received 95 lashes to his back. But he didn't give up. For as long as Turnage remained in slavery, he plotted his escape, okay? And so during his third attempt, he was caught in Mississippi. Now, he was in Alabama. He fled, went to Mississippi. He was caught. And ironically, he was turned in by another enslaved person who feared the presence of a fugitive. So he turned him in. He feared the presence of the fugitive would cause trouble for him. So he turned in this enslaved person who was trying to seek his freedom. Returned back to his owner in Alabama, received another 25 lashes. But neither the threat of recapture nor the bullwhip kept Turnage on the farm. His fourth attempt nearly brought him within gunshot of the Union Army. Now remember, the Union Army was the army of what? Huh? No. There's a Union Army and the Confederate Army, so I want to make sure we're clear. That's why I'm kind of reviewing. It's been a long time since we've been talking about this. Okay, the Union Army was the army that tried to free the slaves. Okay, they were from the North. The Confederate Army was the army that tried to keep slavery in existence. Okay, so I want to make sure when we talk in Union and Confederate, everybody is very clear about that, because I know it's not terms you hear very often right now, and sometimes we get confused. But let's like I said, let's not get it twisted. Let's make sure we know which is which. Okay, so he was close to the Union Army. So once again, he was returned to his owner. He fled again in the summer of 1862, but was again recaptured. And this time he was mauled by several dogs who were sent to track him down. So Chalmers got fed up with him and eventually sent him to Mobile, Alabama, which is Pastor Willis's home, where he could be sold, and he ended up working at a store. Now, meanwhile, a nephew of the former President William Henry Harrison bought Turnage for $2,000 in Confederate money, and his intent was on making him a carriage driver and a house slave. However, once again, Turnage proved to be a disappointment and immediately fled from that situation. Upon his return, once again, he caught again. His master whipped him mercilessly. In response, Turner again fled, once again unsuccessfully, and while he did receive some assistance from other blacks, Turnage's example of repeated attempts and failures revealed just how hard it was for an enslaved person to escape the change. And when I was learning about Black history and reading, I kept thinking, why did they stay? Why didn't they not try to leave, or the enslaved not try to get away? Well, evidently they did. It was just hard to do that because the slave catchers were out there. The legal system was against them. They had dogs. They had other impediments of getting having to go through bushes and through water and things like that. So the conditions were tough to get to freedom, and those that got to freedom were few and far between. When you think of 4 million slaves, and I don't know the number exactly how many actually were able to get to freedom, but it was a challenge. However, in August 1864, we're still talking about Wallace Turnage now. The Union Navy, okay, which is the one that's trying to free the slaves, under Admiral Daniel Farragut, ran a Confederate fort in the mouth of Mobile Bay. So Turnage, once again, took advantage of the chaos of the battle and the inattention of the soldiers and then the sailors and the frightened whites to carefully pick his way through the swamps. He avoided countless snakes, hid in tall grasses, and eventually he used an abandoned rowboat to reach the Union forces. And at last, he finally seizing his own freedom. So I mean, to me, this man was, tried to escape and capture, 5 or 6 times? He never gave up. How many of us, get turned away and turned back when we, set out to do something that is our purpose or our dreams and our goals and our heart's desire, and we get, frustrated and things don't happen like they should or as soon as they should, and we say, oh, well, it's not going to work. Like someone said, never, ever, 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 ever give up. Never. This is what this man is saying to me. Never give. I don't care what he was whipped how many times? 5, 6 times. Multiple times. Mauled by dogs. Went through the water. Avoided snakes. Never, ever, ever give up. If God is telling you to do something, or you have in your mind and set to do something, and it's God's will, just do it. Just do the best you can. But to me, this is an inspiration. His story is very inspirational to me. So I know I've been going a lot. Anybody have any comments or thoughts or questions?
Yeah. I have 2 comments.
Mm-hmm.
One is, it's a Farragut Street in Dania. I never would have guessed it was from this man.
Uh-huh.
But my question is, just listening to how the black slaves all rushed to get married. So it's not like we didn't know the importance of family for mother and father, because that's something that we try to do.
Right.
I wonder what changed so much from that time to this to make it seem like that we haven't had we don't know of a right family, a right looking family from slavery days.
That's a good question. And I think I'm going to let Pastor Jones got his hand up. I'm going to let him address that one. That's beyond my pay grade. No.
No, I was studying this, and the process as it relates to so many blacks, even today, our fathers that are not within the homes, we fail to understand the system. The system, what has happened with the system, they gave an example of a white criminal that have a record and a black that has no record apply for the same job, and they will give the job to the white criminal before they give it to the black. That's today, right? But for us, they hold that record against us. And what was statistically written is that many black fathers do not, either they don't marry or they marry and leave because they cannot support the family. They cannot make enough resources because they can't find jobs or they can't find anything sustainable so that they can support a family. So they just actually walk away. Now, whether that's valid or not, the thing is that it has a lot of validity when you look at it and see that what we actually go through, we are, matter of fact, they say that this system pays our women more than they pay the men, right? And so from that perspective, we then still have a system that actually seeks to keep us at the lowest tier.
And also, when you say system, I thought about also that the welfare system encourages women not to have husbands. Right. You can't get paid if you have a man in the house. Right. Okay, so that whole system, when the welfare system came up, so women were encouraged not to, those on welfare were encouraged not to have men in the house.
I'm intrigued by the fact that pastors are still trying to do this type of leadership too, because at this moment, there's a meeting going on about amnesty, because whites get their voting privileges back without having to go through amnesty. Right. And a lot of times, blacks not only have to go through amnesty, they have to go through all kinds of stuff just to get reinstated into society.
And Sister Willis, you just touched on what I was going to say. When welfare came out, back then it was a big deal because a male couldn't be in the home. Well, welfare don't pay that much now. But like Pastor said, so what they do is they raise the wages of women so they don't need men, or at least convince them that they don't need men. And so it has caused that divide where, men are undervalued, not just by, like you said, in the work field by whites, but also by sisters who making some pretty decent money.
Yeah. Another question back here.
And another thing welfare did was encourage, they knew when a male child was brought up by his mother, when he got to be a certain age, she could do nothing with him. He started idolizing drug dealers, he started idolizing all the bad things, and that was just a plot to enslave him again by putting him in prison. They did it on purpose. Yep. They knew what they were doing, and they knew what the effects were going to be to those young men growing up without their fathers. Welfare was the worst thing ever happened to us.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? These all good comments, questions, comments? Okay, Deacon Grady?
Yes, ma'am. I recall when I was growing up, and my mom lived at a shotgun house, and she was on welfare, and we had to come out and get this government food, and they had an inspector to come around and see who lived in the house because, as was stated before, no man could be in the house. Well, I had to hide or either go outside while the inspector examined the house, if you will, looked all in the eye spot.